Emily Carter had always believed that hard work could defeat privilege. She was wrong. The autumn wind swept across the sprawling campus of Westbridge University, carrying with it the excited chatter of thousands of graduating students. The engineering building, usually quiet and filled with the hum of calculations and computer simulations, had transformed into a battlefield of ambition. In just 3 days, every final-year engineering student would sit for the National Professional Engineering Qualification Examination, a test so prestigious that it had earned the nickname, the Future Maker. For most students, passing the exam meant a good career. For the student who ranked first, it meant everything. The top scorer would receive a full international scholarship, an immediate job offer from Orion Structural Consultants, the country's most respected engineering firm, and sponsorship for a master's degree abroad. It was an opportunity capable of changing an entire family's future. Emily had spent 4 years preparing for this moment. She was the daughter of a widowed schoolteacher from a small farming town. Her father had died when she was only 13, leaving behind medical debts that her mother had struggled to repay for nearly a decade. Every semester at university had been a balancing act between studying, tutoring younger students, and working evening shifts at the campus library. Luxury was a word Emily had only read about. She wore the same winter coat every year. She repaired her backpack instead of buying a new one. She skipped lunch more often than she admitted. Yet despite everything she lacked, she possessed something no amount of money could buy. She was brilliant. Every semester since her first year, Emily had ranked first in her department. Her professors often used her assignments as examples for the rest of the class. Companies visiting the university requested copies of her research papers. Even students from rival universities recognized her name. Most people admired her. One person hated her: Olivia Bennett, the daughter of billionaire construction magnate Richard Bennett. Beautiful, confident, popular, and perpetually second place, Olivia had grown up believing the world existed to applaud her. At private schools, tutors had quietly adjusted grades. At competitions, sponsors had overlooked her mistakes. Doors opened before she even reached them because everyone knew the Bennett family. Then Emily arrived. For the first time in Olivia's life, someone consistently stood above her. No matter how expensive Olivia's tutors were, no matter how many expensive preparation courses she attended, no matter how many all-night study sessions she staged for social media, Emily still scored higher. Every single time. The rivalry had become legendary across the engineering department. Whenever results were posted, students would gather around the notice board, already knowing the order. First, Emily Carter. Second, Olivia Bennett. The gap between them varied. The outcome never did. Inside the university library, Emily closed another thick design manual and rubbed her tired eyes. The digital clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m. Only 4 students remained in the enormous reading hall. Daniel Brooks quietly approached her desk carrying 2 paper cups. "You've forgotten dinner again." Emily looked up and smiled apologetically. "I wasn't hungry." Daniel placed the cup of instant noodles beside her. "You always say that." She laughed softly. "You always ignore me." Daniel pulled out the chair opposite her. "You've been here since 8 this morning. I know. You need sleep. I need rank 1. Daniel sighed. "You already have the highest mock exam score in the country." Emily shrugged. "Mock exams don't change lives. This one will." She looked toward the rain falling outside the giant library windows. "My mother borrowed money so I could attend university." Daniel remained silent. "If I don't win the scholarship," she swallowed, "I'll have to reject Orion's offer because I can't afford the certification fees." Daniel knew she wasn't exaggerating. Winning wasn't about pride. It was survival. Across campus, in the Bennett family's luxury penthouse overlooking the city skyline, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Olivia slammed her tablet onto the marble dining table. "I lost again." Richard Bennett calmly continued reading financial reports. It was another mock examination. Emily beat me by 18 points. Her father finally looked up. So. Olivia stared in disbelief. If she ranks first, Orion will hire her. Richard leaned back. And they'll have the country's best young engineer. He smiled faintly. They'll have whoever I decide they hire. Olivia frowned. Richard Bennett wasn't merely wealthy. His construction company funded university buildings, sponsored engineering competitions, donated millions every year. Half the university board attended his charity galas. Influence was easier to purchase than intelligence. You've worried too much, Richard said calmly. When have I ever allowed this family to lose? Olivia's expression slowly softened. You have a plan? Her father smiled. I always do. The next afternoon, Professor Nathan Harris entered the engineering design laboratory, carrying a stack of marked assignments. The room instantly became quiet. Professor Harris was the department chairman. Strict, respected, feared. He adjusted his glasses before speaking. I've completed your final practice assessments. Students exchanged nervous glances. Professor Harris began announcing scores. 91. 88. 93. One after another. Finally, Olivia Bennett. She stood confidently. 96. Applause filled the room. Olivia smiled proudly. Then, Emily Carter. Professor Harris paused. His eyes briefly met Olivia's. A strange look passed between them. Barely noticeable. But there. Emily walked forward. Professor Harris handed her paper face down. 99. The classroom erupted. 3 points ahead. Again. Olivia's smile disappeared. Emily thanked the professor politely before returning to her seat. As she sat down, she noticed something odd. Professor Harris wasn't looking at her. He was watching Olivia. Only for a second. Then both looked away. Emily frowned. It was probably nothing. Or so she thought. Later that evening, Olivia entered Professor Harris's office without knocking. The secretary outside looked the other way. Clearly, this wasn't unusual. Professor Harris locked the office door. You shouldn't come here. Olivia crossed her arms. She beat me again. I know. I thought you said she'd start making mistakes. Professor Harris removed his glasses. Emily Carter doesn't make mistakes. Silence settled between them. Finally, Olivia placed a thick brown envelope on his desk. I don't need her to make mistakes. Professor Harris stared at the envelope. I only need the final ranking. He didn't touch it. Your father promised no one would ever know. He also promised your research center would receive its new funding. Professor Harris slowly opened the envelope. Inside were documents, property deeds, investment certificates, a bank confirmation, enough money to change anyone's life. He closed the envelope without another word. Olivia smiled. See you after the examination. She left. The office became silent. Professor Harris remained motionless for almost a full minute. Finally, he whispered to himself, I'm sorry, Emily. 3 days later, the National Professional Engineering Qualification Examination began. Hundreds of students filled the enormous examination hall. Metal detectors, identity verification, fingerprint scans, sealed question papers. Everything about the process screamed security. Emily inhaled deeply as she took her assigned seat. Seat B, 17. Directly beside the window. Across the aisle. Olivia smiled confidently. Emily smiled back politely. She had no reason to hate Olivia. Competition was normal. She believed everyone deserved success earned honestly. The chief invigilator raised his hand. You may begin. The hall fell into complete silence. Pens moved. Pages turned. Calculators clicked. Hours disappeared. Emily lost herself inside structural analysis, seismic design calculations, reinforced concrete detailing, steel connections, foundation design, and advanced load combinations. Questions that terrified others felt familiar to her. By the final hour, she had completed every section. She reviewed every answer twice. Satisfied, she signed the final page. When time was called, invigilators collected answer booklets row by row. Emily watched hers disappear into the sealed collection box. She smiled. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. She had done everything she possibly could. Whatever happened now would depend entirely on her own work. She never noticed Professor Harris standing near the exit, watching the sealed examination box with unusually intense eyes. And she certainly never imagined that, hidden behind that calm expression, a decision had already been made. One that would steal not only her rank, but the future she had spent years building. The 7 days following the examination felt longer than the previous 4 years. For most students, the waiting period was filled with celebration. Their hardest exam was finally over, and they spent their days planning graduation trips, attending farewell parties, and posting nostalgic photos across social media. Emily couldn't relax. Not because she doubted her answers, but because the result carried the weight of 2 lives, her own and her mother's. Every morning, she woke before sunrise, checked the university's examination portal, and found the same message: results pending. Every night, she reassured herself that she had done her best. Whatever happened next, she had no regrets. Or so she believed. 3 days before the results were scheduled to be released, Orion Structural Consultants invited the top 10 predicted candidates for an informal networking dinner. The invitation itself was considered an honor. Emily almost declined. She didn't own suitable clothes. After discovering her hesitation, Daniel appeared outside her apartment, carrying a neatly pressed navy blue blazer. "I borrowed it from my older brother," he said casually. Emily looked at the expensive fabric. "I can't wear this." "You can." "What if I ruin it?" Daniel laughed. "You've survived structural engineering. A dinner jacket isn't your greatest challenge." She smiled despite herself. "Thank you. You'll return it after you become the country's top-ranked engineer." Emily shook her head. "You sound more confident than I am." "Because I've read your mock exam papers." He grinned. "If someone beats you fairly, I'll personally congratulate them." Emily laughed. "I'll remember that." The dinner was held inside one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Executives from Orion moved from table to table, introducing themselves to students. Emily felt completely out of place. She carefully held a glass of orange juice while observing conversations from the corner of the ballroom. A distinguished man approached her. "You must be Emily Carter." She turned. The silver-haired gentleman extended his hand. "Michael Anderson." Emily recognized him instantly. The CEO of Orion Structural Consultants. She nearly spilled her drink. "It's an honor to meet you, sir. I've heard remarkable things about you." Emily lowered her eyes modestly. "I'm still learning." Michael smiled. The best engineers never stop saying that. Before their conversation could continue, another voice interrupted. "Mr. Anderson." Olivia Bennett walked toward them, wearing an elegant designer gown that probably cost more than Emily's yearly rent. Her smile was flawless. "So nice to see you again." Michael nodded politely. "Miss Bennett." Emily noticed something curious. The warmth in Michael's voice disappeared almost instantly. Olivia began speaking enthusiastically about leadership programs, international conferences, and the future of sustainable construction. Michael listened patiently. When she finally excused herself to greet another executive, he quietly turned back toward Emily. "Your graduation project." Emily blinked. "Sir, I read it." "You, personally?" "It was excellent." Emily's cheeks warmed. "Thank you." Michael lowered his voice. We're looking for engineers who solve problems. His eyes briefly followed Olivia across the ballroom. Not people who simply look successful. Emily wasn't entirely sure what he meant. Across the room, Richard Bennett observed everything. His expensive watch glimmered beneath the lights as he quietly sipped a glass of wine. Standing beside him was Professor Harris. You look nervous, Richard said calmly. Professor Harris swallowed. This isn't too late to stop. Richard smiled without looking at him. It became too late the moment you accepted my donation. I've spent 30 years teaching. And you'll retire comfortably. Professor Harris looked toward Emily. She was laughing softly at something Daniel had said. Completely unaware. Richard followed his gaze. A talented girl. There wasn't a hint of sympathy in his voice. But talent doesn't build empires. Power does. The following morning, Emily returned to the campus library to return several borrowed textbooks. Mrs. Wilson, the elderly librarian who had watched Emily grow over 4 years, smiled warmly. Finished already? Emily nodded. I don't think I'll need these anymore. Mrs. Wilson stamped the return slips. You know? She hesitated. I've worked here for 28 years. Emily looked up. I've never seen a student work harder than you. Emily smiled gently. Hard work doesn't always guarantee success. Mrs. Wilson reached across the counter. It guarantees something even more important. What? You'll never have to wonder whether you deserved it. Emily carried those words with her as she walked home. She had no idea how much she would need them. Result day. Students flooded the university before sunrise. By 7:30, the engineering courtyard was already packed. Television crews waited near the administration building. The National Engineering Examination only announced the top 50 candidates publicly each year, making the event almost as exciting as a championship final. Emily stood quietly beside Daniel. Her hands were freezing. Daniel noticed. Nervous. A little. Liar. She laughed weakly. I'm terrified. Across the courtyard, Olivia posed for photographs with several classmates. She looked unusually confident. Almost. Certain. Emily found that strange. No one could possibly know the results in advance. Could they? At precisely 9 o'clock. The giant electronic display outside the administration building flickered to life. The crowd fell silent. One name appeared. Rank 50. Then 49. 48. The names continued climbing upward. Students screamed with excitement each time someone they knew appeared. Emily waited. 40. 30. 25. Still nothing. Daniel frowned. That's impossible. Emily forced herself to stay calm. Maybe she had ranked in the top 10. 10. 9. 8. Still nothing. Her heartbeat accelerated. 7. 6. 5. Nothing. 4. 3. Nothing. Only 2 names remained. The enormous screen flashed. Rank 2. Emily Carter. The crowd erupted into applause. Daniel grabbed her shoulders. You did it. Emily stared at the screen. Second. Second wasn't bad. Second still meant a successful career. Yet, something inside her whispered that it wasn't right. She knew every answer she'd written. She had never scored second in any national mock examination. Not once. The final name slowly appeared. The entire courtyard held its breath. National rank 1. Olivia Bennett. Confetti exploded from the stage. Music filled the campus. Television cameras immediately rushed toward Olivia. She covered her mouth dramatically before bursting into tears. I can't believe it. Her parents embraced her. Students surrounded her. Journalists shouted questions. Miss Bennett, how does it feel to become the country's top engineering graduate? What message would you give young women? What are your future plans? Meanwhile, Emily remained perfectly still. The applause around her sounded strangely distant. Daniel stared at the scoreboard. This. He looked back at Emily. Doesn't make sense. Emily swallowed. No, it doesn't. An hour later, the official score breakdown was released. Emily opened the results portal on her phone. Subject after subject appeared. Structural analysis. Steel design. Earthquake engineering. Foundation engineering. Everything seemed normal. Then, the detailed answer review became available. Emily's breathing stopped. Question 27. Wrong. Impossible. She distinctly remembered solving it. Question 42. Blank. No. She had written 2 full pages. Question 56. Calculation missing. Question 61. Entire drawing absent. Emily's hands began shaking. No. Daniel looked over her shoulder. His face slowly lost all color. Emily, this isn't my paper. What? She pointed frantically at the screen. That isn't my handwriting. Daniel looked closer. The signatures looked similar. But the writing, the spacing, even the way certain letters curved. Completely different. Emily whispered the words she couldn't believe she was saying. They switched my exam paper. Daniel stared at her. What? They switched it. She looked toward the celebration stage where Olivia stood proudly, holding the championship trophy high above her head. Emily's heartbeat thundered in her ears. The answer sheet on the screen wasn't hers. She knew it with absolute certainty. And somewhere inside the university, her real examination paper had disappeared. Emily couldn't hear the applause anymore. The cheers echoing across the university courtyard became distant, as though she were underwater. All she could see was Olivia Bennett standing on the stage, smiling through fake tears as cameras flashed from every direction. The giant LED screen behind Olivia displayed the words, National Rank 1, Olivia Bennett. The audience erupted into another round of applause. Reporters crowded around her. What inspired you to work so hard? How many hours did you study each day? What advice would you give students who dream of following in your footsteps? Olivia lowered her head modestly before answering in a practiced voice. I've always believed that success belongs to those who never give up. I dedicated 4 years to this dream, and today proves that persistence always wins. Emily's fingers curled into fists. Persistence? For years? Everything Olivia was receiving belonged to someone else. Daniel gently touched her shoulder. Emily, don't do anything reckless. She didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the stage. I know my handwriting. I know every calculation I wrote. I know every diagram. Daniel nodded slowly. I believe you. Emily turned toward him. You do. Without question. He had studied beside Emily for 4 years. He had watched her fill hundreds of notebooks. He knew the tiny habits in her handwriting. The way she crossed the number 7. The way she wrote the letter G. The slight rightward slant of every capital letter. Those habits couldn't simply disappear. Someone had replaced her answer sheet. The question was, who and how? Ignoring the celebrations around them, Emily hurried toward the examination administration building. Several university employees were already leaving after the ceremony. She approached the reception desk. I need to speak with someone regarding my examination paper. The receptionist smiled politely. Congratulations on securing 2nd place. Emily forced a smile. Thank you. I believe there's been a mistake. The woman's expression changed slightly. What kind of mistake? The answer sheet uploaded online isn't mine. The receptionist frowned. That's impossible. I'd like to review my original paper. I'm afraid candidates aren't allowed to access original answer booklets. There has to be an appeal process. There is. The receptionist slid a printed form across the counter. You may submit a written appeal. Emily quickly scanned the document. Appeals would only be considered if there was evidence of clerical errors in totaling marks. Nothing about swapped answer sheets. Nothing about fraud. Nothing about tampering. Daniel looked over the document. This doesn't help. I'm sorry, the receptionist said sympathetically. Those are national regulations. Emily took a deep breath. Who had access to the answer sheets after the examination? I'm not authorized to disclose that. Please. I'm sorry. Emily thanked her quietly before walking away. She wasn't angry at the receptionist. She was simply following rules. Rules that protected the system. Or perhaps, protected someone inside it. That evening, Emily sat alone in her tiny apartment. Her laptop remained open on the examination portal. She enlarged the scanned answer sheet again and again, then compared it with old assignments she had submitted throughout university. The differences became painfully obvious. The handwriting was similar enough to fool someone unfamiliar with her, but not identical. Whoever had written this paper had tried to imitate her style. Yet they had missed dozens of tiny details. The spacing between equations. The shape of the number 3. The way she labeled engineering sketches. Even the pressure of the pen looked different. Emily suddenly remembered something. Every semester, the engineering department archived practical examination records. Those records contained her authentic handwriting. If she could compare them. She grabbed her phone. Daniel answered immediately. I found something. So did I. Emily blinked. What? I'll be there in 15 minutes. Daniel arrived carrying his laptop. Without saying a word, he opened a university news article from the previous year. The article featured Emily after winning the National Student Design Competition. Included in the article was a photograph of one of her engineering sketches. Daniel zoomed in, then placed it beside the examination paper. Look. Emily leaned closer. The dimension arrows were different. She always drew arrowheads filled in. The examination paper used open arrows. A tiny detail. But engineers noticed tiny details. Then Daniel pointed at another difference. You always write millimeters as mm. Emily nodded. The paper says mm. My professors used to tease me for writing everything in lowercase. Daniel looked at her. This isn't your work. Emily closed her eyes. For one brief moment, relief replaced despair. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't losing her mind. Someone really had stolen her future. The next morning, Emily requested a meeting with Professor Nathan Harris. His secretary ushered her into the office. Professor Harris smiled warmly. Emily, congratulations on your excellent result. She remained standing. I didn't come for congratulations. His smile faded. I'd like to review my original examination paper. I'm afraid national policy doesn't permit that. I know my answer sheet was switched. For the first time, Professor Harris looked uncomfortable. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm implying that the paper uploaded online isn't mine. He folded his hands together. Emotions often cloud judgment after disappointing results. I wasn't disappointed. He frowned. I was robbed. Silence filled the office. Finally, Professor Harris stood. Emily, you secured second place nationally. That's an extraordinary achievement. You should focus on your future instead of chasing conspiracy theories. Emily stared directly into his eyes. If I really finished second, why won't anyone let me see my original paper? For a split second, something flickered across his face. Fear. Then it disappeared. The meeting is over. Emily didn't move. Professor, did you switch my paper? His voice suddenly hardened. Leave. I asked a question. I said. He pointed toward the door. Leave. Outside the office, Emily felt her heart sink. She had gone there hoping to find reassurance. Instead, She found something worse. Professor Harris hadn't acted like an innocent man falsely accused. He had acted like someone desperate to end the conversation. Daniel was waiting outside. How did it go? Emily looked back at the closed office door. He lied. You can tell? He never answered my question. Inside the office, Professor Harris remained frozen until he heard Emily's footsteps disappear down the hallway. Only then did he collapse into his chair. His hands trembled violently. A framed family photograph sat on his desk. His wife, his daughter, his grandson. He stared at them for several seconds before opening the bottom drawer. Inside lay a thick brown envelope. The same envelope Olivia Bennett had delivered days before the examination. Beside it, another item. A sealed evidence bag. Inside the transparent plastic was an examination answer booklet. The real one. Emily Carter's. Professor Harris closed his eyes. I'm sorry. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I never should have agreed. A sudden knock interrupted his thoughts. Before he could hide the evidence, the office door opened. Richard Bennett walked in without waiting for permission. His expensive shoes clicked softly against the wooden floor. You met with Miss Carter. Professor Harris quickly locked the drawer. She suspects. Richard smiled calmly. Of course she does. She's asking questions. Let her. What if she keeps investigating? Richard stepped closer. You've already made your choice, Professor. His smile disappeared. Don't make me question your loyalty now. Professor Harris swallowed. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. Richard adjusted his cufflinks. No. You only intended to secure your family's future. He leaned slightly closer. And so did I. Without another word, Richard turned and walked out. The office fell silent once more. Professor Harris looked toward the locked drawer. Inside it rested the one piece of evidence that could destroy everything. And for the first time since accepting Richard Bennett's money, he wondered whether the price had been far too high. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of her tiny apartment, replaying every second of her meeting with Professor Harris. She wasn't imagining it. The fear in his eyes had been real. Not confusion. Not irritation. Fear. People who were innocent denied accusations. People who were guilty tried to end the conversation. Professor Harris had done neither. He had simply wanted her to leave. That meant only one thing. There was something inside that office he didn't want her to see. At 6 the next morning, Emily's phone buzzed. Daniel. I found something. I'm coming. Daniel was waiting outside the engineering building with 2 coffees. He handed one to Emily before opening his laptop. I checked the examination regulations. Emily sat beside him on the stone bench. What did you find? The National Examination Board requires universities to keep original answer sheets for 5 years. Emily's eyes widened. They can't destroy them? No. They're legal records. Emily felt hope for the first time since the results had been announced. If the paper still exists, we can prove everything. Daniel nodded. But getting access won't be easy. Emily stared toward the administration building. I don't need easy. I just need the truth. That afternoon, Emily filed an official appeal with the National Examination Board. She attached everything she had. Samples of her handwriting, copies of previous examinations, engineering drawings, even photographs from old competitions. The appeal ended with one simple request. I request an independent forensic handwriting examination of my original answer sheet. When she pressed the submit button, she felt strangely calm. Now the truth would speak for itself. Or so she hoped. Across the city, Richard Bennett received a phone call. The appeal has been submitted. He smiled faintly. I expected as much. What should we do? Richard looked through the glass wall of his office toward the skyline. Nothing. Sir, the original paper no longer exists. Professor Harris nearly dropped his phone. What do you mean? Richard's voice remained perfectly calm. You know exactly what I mean. But you've served your purpose. Professor Harris gripped the phone tighter. The examination board may request the evidence. They won't receive it. Richard ended the call. Professor Harris stared at the silent screen. His breathing became uneven. He immediately rushed to his office. His hands trembled as he unlocked the bottom drawer. Empty. The evidence bag was gone. Emily's original answer booklet had disappeared. No. He searched every drawer, every cabinet, every shelf. Nothing. Someone had taken it. Or perhaps someone had never intended for it to remain there. 3 days later, Emily received a formal email. Your appeal has been accepted. Her heart skipped. She continued reading. An investigation committee has requested the original examination booklet from Westbridge University. Emily smiled. Finally, if the committee compared both papers, the truth would be obvious. Daniel hugged her. I told you. They can't hide forever. Emily laughed for the first time in days. No, they can't. Meanwhile, the investigation committee arrived at the university. 3 officials entered the secure examination archive, accompanied by university administrators. Professor Harris stood silently nearby. His face looked pale. One official checked the inventory list. Candidate B, 17. Another employee searched the archive shelves. Minutes passed. Then, Sir. The employee frowned. It isn't here. The lead investigator looked up. What do you mean? The storage envelope is empty. Professor Harris closed his eyes. Exactly as he feared. The investigator turned toward him. Professor Harris. When was this archive last opened? His voice cracked. I'm not certain. The investigator's expression hardened. Original examination papers cannot simply disappear. I understand. Then explain. Professor Harris couldn't. Because he didn't know. He truly didn't. The news spread across campus within hours. The answer booklet belonging to National Rank 2 had gone missing. Students gathered in small groups across the university. Some were shocked. Others whispered. Coincidence? Negligence? Or something worse? Social media exploded. How does an examination paper disappear? This sounds suspicious. Someone should investigate. For the first time, public opinion began shifting. People weren't accusing Emily anymore. They were asking questions. Questions Richard Bennett hated. That evening, Emily received an anonymous email. No sender. No signature. Just one sentence. Stop investigating if you value your future. Attached was a photograph. Her apartment building. Taken from across the street. Emily's blood ran cold. Someone had been watching her. Daniel looked at the email. This isn't just about an exam anymore. Emily nodded slowly. They're afraid. Afraid of what? She looked at the picture again. The truth. The next morning, Emily left for work at the campus library as usual. Halfway there, she noticed a black luxury sedan parked across the road. The windows were tinted. As she walked, the car moved. Slowly. Keeping pace. She turned another corner. It followed. Her heartbeat quickened. Without thinking, she entered a crowded shopping arcade. The sedan stopped outside. It didn't enter. It simply waited. Emily remained hidden inside a bookstore for nearly 20 minutes. Only when the car finally drove away did she leave. Whoever had sent the email hadn't been bluffing. Someone really was watching her. That evening, Daniel insisted on walking her home. As they reached her apartment building, he suddenly stopped. What? He pointed across the street. A man wearing a gray hoodie quickly turned away. The moment he realized he had been noticed, He disappeared into the crowd. Daniel frowned. He was photographing the building. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This has gone too far. Daniel looked at her. Promise me something. What? If this becomes dangerous. Walk away. Emily smiled sadly. If I walk away, they win. The following afternoon, Professor Harris requested an urgent meeting with Emily. She arrived cautiously. His office door was already closed. The professor looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. His usually neat hair was disheveled. He gestured toward the chair. Sit down. Emily remained standing. You wanted to see me. He took a long breath. I owe you an apology. Emily said nothing. For the way I spoke to you. She waited. He looked toward the closed blinds. Then whispered. Someone took your answer sheet. Emily's pulse quickened. You admit it? I never said that. But I said someone took it. Emily stepped closer. Professor. Who? His lips parted. Before he could answer, a loud knock echoed through the office. Both of them froze. Professor Harris looked toward the door with visible panic. Another knock. Harder this time. Professor. A familiar voice came from outside. It was Richard Bennett. I believe we have a meeting. Professor Harris's face turned white. He looked back at Emily. His mouth moved silently. 3 days after Richard Bennett's visit, Professor Nathan Harris disappeared. His lectures were cancelled. Department meetings were postponed. His office remained locked. Whenever students asked where he was, the administration gave the same answer. Professor Harris is on medical leave. Emily didn't believe it for a second. She couldn't forget the terror she had seen in his eyes. It wasn't the fear of losing his job. It was the fear of someone who believed his family was in danger. Richard Bennett hadn't needed to threaten him directly. Men like Richard never did. Their reputation did the talking. Meanwhile, the university had become divided. Some students still believed Olivia deserved her victory. Others were beginning to question everything. The disappearance of Emily's original examination paper had become national news. Social media was flooded with debates. How does a nationally supervised exam paper simply vanish? Why hasn't the university explained anything? If the paper disappeared, shouldn't Rank 1 be suspended until the investigation is complete? Television channels invited legal experts. Education activists demanded transparency. For the first time, Richard Bennett's name began appearing in online discussions. Not as a respected businessman, but as a possible influence behind the scandal. Richard noticed, and he hated it. Emily continued working quietly at the campus library. She avoided interviews, ignored reporters, refused to post anything online. She wanted evidence, not sympathy. One rainy evening, just before closing time, Mrs. Wilson approached her desk. Emily, there is someone here to see you. Emily looked toward the entrance. An elderly security guard stood nervously near the door. She recognized him immediately. Mr. Samuel Reed. He had worked at Westbridge University for nearly 30 years. He rarely spoke to students. Emily walked over. You wanted to see me? The old man looked around carefully before lowering his voice. Not here. 10 minutes later, they sat inside a small tea shop across the street from the university. Samuel wrapped both hands around his cup. His fingers shook. I don't have much time. Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel. What is it? Samuel looked directly at Emily. I think your examination paper was stolen. Emily's heartbeat stopped. You know something? I saw something. Daniel leaned forward. What did you see? Samuel closed his eyes. It was the night after the examination. I was assigned to Building C, the archive floor. Emily held her breath. Around 11 o'clock, I saw Professor Harris entering the examination archive. Was he alone? Samuel hesitated. No. There was another man. Emily immediately asked. Who? Samuel looked toward the window. I couldn't see his face. But he wasn't university staff. He arrived in a black Mercedes. Emily and Daniel looked at each other. Richard Bennett drove a black Mercedes. Samuel continued. They stayed inside for nearly 40 minutes. When they came out, the professor was carrying a sealed evidence bag. Emily whispered, "My answer sheet." Samuel nodded slowly. "I think so." Daniel quickly took out his notebook. Did the security cameras record them? Samuel's expression darkened. "That's why I came." "What do you mean?" "The footage disappeared." Emily frowned. Disappeared. The next morning, our supervisor instructed us to overwrite the recordings from that night. Daniel stared in disbelief. "Security footage is kept for 90 days. Samuel nodded. "I know. But that order came directly from the university president's office." Emily felt cold. Someone wasn't merely hiding evidence. They were erasing it. "Why are you telling us now?" Emily asked quietly. Samuel looked down at his tea. "My granddaughter." Emily waited. "She wanted to become an engineer. She admired you. I watched you studying every night in the library." His eyes became red. "I couldn't sleep anymore." He reached into his jacket. "I copied something before the footage disappeared." Emily froze. Samuel placed a small USB flash drive on the table. "I don't know if it still works. But I couldn't bring myself to destroy it." Emily stared at the tiny device. Months of despair, hope, anger. Everything seemed to rest inside that piece of plastic. Daniel immediately borrowed a laptop from the library. The three of them locked themselves inside a private study room. Emily inserted the USB drive. One folder appeared. Archive_backup. Daniel clicked it. The screen flickered. Then, security footage appeared. The timestamp showed exactly what Samuel had described. 11:08 p.m. The archive hallway. Emily's heart pounded. Professor Harris appeared first. He unlocked the archive door. Minutes later, a second figure entered. The camera only captured his back. Expensive suit. Tall. Confident. His face remained hidden beneath the angle of the camera. Daniel paused the video. Zoom in. He enlarged the image. The man's wrist became visible. A luxury watch. Emily frowned. "Can you make it clearer?" Daniel sharpened the frame. The logo became readable. A custom platinum Bennett chronograph. Only 50 had ever been produced, each engraved with the Bennett family crest. Emily remembered seeing the same watch on Richard Bennett's wrist at the Orion networking dinner. Samuel continued watching silently. 28 minutes later, the archive door opened again. Professor Harris stepped outside carrying a sealed examination envelope. Richard Bennett followed behind him. Then, something happened that made Emily stop breathing. Richard took the envelope from Professor Harris, placed it inside a black leather briefcase, and walked away. Professor Harris remained standing alone in the hallway. His shoulders slowly slumped. He looked like a man who had just sold his soul. Daniel replayed the footage 3 times. "This," he whispered. "This is enough." Emily shook her head. "No. It proves Richard took something. But not what?" Daniel sighed. "You're right. The envelope label isn't visible." Emily looked at Samuel. "Is this the only copy?" The old man nodded. "I hid it in my house. No one knows it exists." Emily carefully removed the USB drive. "Thank you." Samuel smiled sadly. "I only wish I'd been brave enough sooner." That night, Emily uploaded the video to a secure cloud server, then copied it onto 3 different USB drives. She wasn't taking chances. Not anymore. Daniel looked relieved. If something happens, the evidence survives. Emily nodded. They can't erase everything. Or so she hoped. The following morning, Samuel Reed never arrived at work. By noon, news spread across campus. The elderly security guard had suffered a fatal heart attack during the night. Emily dropped the book she was shelving. No. Mrs. Wilson quietly wiped away tears. He was such a kind man. Emily couldn't move. Just yesterday, he had been drinking tea with them, smiling, apologizing for staying silent. Now, he was gone. At the funeral 2 days later, only a handful of university employees attended. Emily stood silently beneath a gray umbrella as rain fell over the cemetery. Daniel suddenly touched her arm. Look. Across the road, a black Mercedes sat parked beneath a large oak tree. Inside, Richard Bennett watched the funeral without stepping out of the car. Their eyes met through the rain-covered windshield. Richard smiled. A slow, almost amused smile. Then the car drove away. Emily felt an icy chill run through her body. Was Samuel's death really a heart attack? Or had someone ensured the only witness would never testify? She didn't know. But one thing became painfully clear. Richard Bennett had noticed their investigation. And he wasn't afraid. Because he believed he had already won. What Richard didn't know was that Samuel Reed had left behind something far more dangerous than his testimony. A copy of the truth. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Emily finally possessed a weapon powerful enough to fight back. The day after Samuel Reed's funeral, Emily sat alone in her apartment, staring at the tiny USB drive lying on her desk. It looked insignificant. A piece of plastic no larger than her thumb. Yet inside it was the first real crack in Richard Bennett's perfect empire. Daniel walked in carrying breakfast, only to find Emily still sitting in the same position. You haven't slept. Emily shook her head. I keep thinking about Samuel. Daniel placed the food on the table. He knew the risk. He still chose to help. Emily looked down at the flash drive. I can't let his courage be wasted. Daniel sat opposite her. So, what's next? Emily took a deep breath. We stopped chasing Richard. Daniel frowned. What? We make Richard chase us. Daniel blinked in confusion. I don't understand. Emily smiled for the first time in weeks. If Richard believes we're getting close to proving the envelope contained my answer sheet, he'll try to destroy the evidence. Daniel slowly began to understand. And if he tries, he exposes himself. Emily nodded. We've been reacting to every move he's made. Now, it's his turn. That afternoon, Emily deliberately visited the National Examination Board. She knew reporters had been following the story. She knew cameras would be waiting outside. Sure enough, the moment she stepped out of the building, microphones surrounded her. Miss Carter, have investigators found your examination paper? Do you believe the university is hiding evidence? Emily remained calm. I've recently received new information. The reporters immediately moved closer. Can you tell us what it is? Emily hesitated just long enough. I'm not ready to discuss the details. But she looked directly into the cameras. The truth always leaves footprints. Then she walked away. Within an hour, every major news channel repeated her statement. Emily Carter claims she has new evidence. Richard Bennett watched the broadcast from his office. His expression never changed, but the crystal glass in his hand cracked beneath the pressure of his grip. What evidence? No one answered. Richard turned toward his assistant. I want every movement she's made in the last 48 hours. Yes, sir. And find out who she's spoken to. That evening, Emily received exactly the response she expected. Her apartment was broken into. Nothing expensive was stolen. Her laptop remained untouched. Her television, her wallet, her jewelry, everything was still there. Except, the drawer containing the USB drive had been emptied. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later. They took it. Emily smiled. No. She opened another drawer. Inside lay the real USB drive. The stolen one had been an empty decoy. Daniel couldn't help laughing. So they really took the bait. Emily nodded. Which means Richard believes the evidence was genuine. Daniel looked thoughtful. Can we prove he ordered the break-in? Emily shook her head. Not yet. But he'll make another mistake. The following morning, Richard Bennett received the stolen USB. His private security chief placed it on the conference table. We recovered it. Richard inserted the drive into his laptop. One folder appeared. Evidence. He opened it. Nothing. Empty. His jaw tightened. It was a fake. The security chief lowered his head. I'm sorry. Richard slowly closed the laptop. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. He had underestimated someone. Emily Carter wasn't acting like a frightened graduate anymore. She was thinking several moves ahead. Meanwhile, Professor Harris couldn't live with his conscience any longer. Every night, he saw Emily standing outside his office. Every night, he remembered taking her future from her with his own hands. He had accepted Richard Bennett's money, believing it would be a simple exchange. One examination paper. One altered ranking. No one would ever know. Instead, an innocent security guard was dead. A brilliant student's life had been destroyed. And he had become a prisoner inside his own guilt. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a revolver. It had belonged to his late father. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly closed the drawer again. No. This isn't the way. He reached for another object instead. His phone. There was only one person left he could call. Emily Carter. Emily answered cautiously. Professor? I need to see you. His voice sounded different. Broken. I can't do this anymore. Emily's heart raced. Where are you? St. Andrew's Church. The old chapel near Riverside. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The church had been abandoned for years. Its stained glass windows were cracked. Dust covered the wooden pews. Only a few candles burned near the altar. Professor Harris stood waiting. He looked 10 years older than the last time Emily had seen him. She approached slowly. You wanted to tell me something. He nodded. I owe you the truth. Daniel quietly activated the voice recorder inside his pocket. Professor Harris noticed. He didn't object. Instead, he began speaking. I switched your examination paper. Emily closed her eyes. Hearing the words hurt more than she expected. I knew it. I did it. He looked down. Richard Bennett paid me. Silence filled the church. My family was drowning in debt. My wife needed surgery. My grandson's treatment wasn't covered by insurance. I convinced myself. It was only an examination. I told myself another opportunity would come for you. His voice cracked. I was wrong. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you stop? I was afraid. Then. He looked toward the church doors. I became trapped. Professor Harris reached into his coat. Emily's heartbeat quickened. Instead of a weapon, he removed a folded envelope. I made copies. Emily stared. I thought Richard destroyed everything. He destroyed the original. Professor Harris nodded. But before he took it, I scanned every page. Emily's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. Inside was a complete copy of her original answer booklet. Every calculation, every drawing, every answer. Her handwriting, her signature, everything. Tears rolled down her face. This. Professor Harris nodded. This is the paper that should have been graded. Daniel quickly compared several pages with the online version. Every major question was different. Emily had been telling the truth all along. Professor Harris continued speaking. I've already written a signed confession. I've listed every payment, every meeting, every instruction Richard Bennett gave me. He handed Emily another document. If anything happens to me, give this to the police. Emily looked at him. Nothing is going to happen. He gave a sad smile. You don't know Richard Bennett. Before anyone could say another word, a loud engine echoed outside. 3 black SUVs stopped in front of the abandoned church. Daniel rushed toward the broken window. His face turned pale. They found us. Several men stepped out wearing dark suits. Not police. Private security. Professor Harris's shoulders slumped. I was followed. Emily quickly gathered the confession, the copied answer booklet, and the recorder. Daniel whispered urgently. The back door. The 3 of them hurried toward the rear exit, just as heavy footsteps thundered through the front entrance. Voices echoed through the church. Search everywhere. They can't leave with those documents. Emily's heart pounded. She clutched the envelope against her chest. For the first time, she wasn't running to prove she was innocent. She was running with the evidence that could destroy one of the most powerful men in the country. Behind her, the church doors slammed open. Richard Bennett's men were closing in. And the hunt had only just begun. Emily's lungs burned as she and Daniel burst through the back door of the abandoned church. The confession, the copied answer sheet, and the voice recording were clutched tightly against her chest. Behind them, the heavy footsteps of Richard Bennett's security team echoed through the empty building. Run! Daniel shouted. The narrow alley behind the church led directly to the main road. As they reached it, the sound of police sirens suddenly filled the air. Richard's men froze. 2 police cars screeched to a halt, followed by vehicles from the National Investigation Bureau. Officers rushed toward the church, ordering everyone to stay where they were. Richard Bennett's private guards immediately backed away. Emily turned in disbelief. What? Daniel smiled, trying to catch his breath. I called the investigators while Professor Harris was confessing. I kept the line open the entire time. Within minutes, the church was surrounded. Professor Harris stepped forward with tears streaming down his face. I'll cooperate, he said quietly. I'll tell you everything. He handed the investigators his signed confession. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt the crushing weight on her shoulders begin to lift. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Professor Harris admitted that Richard Bennett had bribed him to replace Emily's examination paper with another answer booklet after the exam. The copied answer sheet Professor Harris had secretly scanned matched every assignment Emily had submitted during her 4 years at Westbridge University. Independent handwriting experts confirmed it. Digital writing pressure analysis confirmed it. Fingerprint traces on the original scanned pages confirmed it. There was no longer any doubt. Emily Carter had earned the highest score in the nation. The paper submitted under Olivia Bennett's name had never belonged to her. The National Examination Board immediately suspended Olivia's Rank 1 title. Orion's structural consultants withdrew her employment offer. The university announced an emergency disciplinary hearing. News channels interrupted their regular programming. National engineering exam fraud exposed. Top rank obtained through bribery. University chairman under criminal investigation. The story spread across the country within hours. Olivia Bennett refused to accept it. She stood before dozens of reporters outside the university. I knew nothing about this, she cried. I worked hard. I earned my results. But every lie fell apart under the weight of the evidence. Bank transfer records linked her father to Professor Harris. Security footage showed Richard Bennett leaving the examination archive with the sealed envelope. Professor Harris repeated his confession under oath. When investigators questioned Olivia about answers on her examination paper, she couldn't explain the calculations or engineering drawings that had supposedly earned her first place. The cameras captured every second. For the first time in her life, there was no one left to protect her. Exactly 1 week after the investigation began, the university organized another ceremony. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. There were no balloons. No celebration. Only silence. Students, professors, reporters, and government officials filled the auditorium. Olivia Bennett stood on the stage, her hands trembling. The gold medal she had proudly worn only days earlier rested around her neck. The chancellor stepped to the microphone. Following the findings of the National Investigation Bureau, Westbridge University officially revokes Olivia Bennett's National Rank 1 title. Gasps echoed through the hall. An official walked toward Olivia. Without saying a word, he removed the gold medal from around her neck. Tears streamed down her face as flashes from hundreds of cameras lit the room. The applause she had once received was replaced by complete silence. Her dream had lasted just 1 hour. The chancellor turned toward the audience. It is now my honor to recognize the rightful National Rank 1 graduate. He smiled warmly. Emily Carter. The auditorium erupted. Students rose to their feet. Daniel was the first to clap. Mrs. Wilson wiped tears from her eyes. Even professors who had once doubted Emily stood in respect. Emily slowly walked onto the stage. This time, there were no feelings of anger. No desire for revenge. Only peace. The chancellor placed the gold medal around her neck. "You earned this," he said quietly. Emily looked toward the audience. Richard Bennett sat in the front row between 2 police officers, his hands in handcuffs. His business empire had collapsed overnight. His assets were frozen. His reputation was destroyed. Professor Harris accepted full responsibility for his crimes and was sentenced according to the law, expressing sincere remorse for betraying both his profession and his students. As for Olivia, she lowered her head and silently walked out of the auditorium, knowing that the title she had stolen could never truly belong to her. Months later, Emily began her career at Orion Structural Consultants as the nation's highest-ranked engineering graduate. Years afterward, she returned to Westbridge University, not as a struggling student, but as the keynote speaker for a new graduating class. Looking across the sea of hopeful faces, she smiled and ended her speech with the words she had learned through the hardest chapter of her life. Talent may open a door. Hard work may keep it open. But integrity is what allows you to walk through it with your head held high. Lies can steal success for a moment, but the truth always finds its way home. The auditorium rose in a standing ovation. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, Emily Carter knew she had finally won. What would you have done if you were given a second chance? Would you seek revenge? Or would you let the truth become your greatest weapon? If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Reborn for revenge, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another gripping rebirth and revenge story. Every week, we bring you powerful tales of betrayal, justice, redemption, and second chances that will keep you hooked until the very end. Tell us in the comments, do you think Emily forgave Professor Harris? Or do some betrayals never deserve forgiveness? We read every comment, and your ideas might inspire our next story. Until next time, remember, a lie may win the moment, but the truth always claims the ending. See you in the next story, only on Reborn for Revenge.